The human being is a community creature. We are community creatures. That means we derive our identities from communities. Your first name was not invented by you, it was given to you by your environment. Your native language was given to you by your environment. How you should behave as male or female was given to you by your environment. The reactions you have to certain words, whether it's cuss words or what you consider uh, good words, are given by the environment. We are community creatures. So our native language, how we communicate with others, our first name, also our primary reactions, how we deal with difficulties, are also given by our environment. So think about it. If all your basic qualities are given to you by your environment and later in life, based on that, you develop further, that means that if your environment had contention or curses, you receive that also. That's something people often forget. So in this video, I want to talk about deliverance from national traumas or deliverance from national narcissism. Now, let me explain what I mean with that. Groups of people can make horrible decisions. Decisions will cost in the long run as a group. So after the decision has been made and the bad consequences appear, now they need to deal with the consequences. But what if people don't want to deal with the consequences? They'll begin to blame each other. And then you'll have civil wars. And once there's civil war, there will be some military power that comes to ease things. And then what led to the civil war has to be covered up or reframed in a different way so that people will not realize why there was civil war to begin with. Because once people realize why there was civil war, they'll have to face that their community is not as great as they thought it was. And people don't want to go through this because human beings need something to look up to. So that's how communities develop. They accumulate traumas over time, and these traumas are transferred to the next generations. So worldwide, everyone has received traumas from their ancestors that is passed down through them to them through society. That's why when you become delivered as a believer, you also need to be delivered from your environment and from the generational conflicts that's been passed to you by your ancestors. Now, your ancestors are not aware you're here because they've been dead a long time ago, but they still pass things on. I'm going to give, let me give a parable to you. Let's say you have a man who's happily married. His wife is beautiful, she's a nice figure, she wears expensive jewelry, she is soft spoken, everyone likes her, and there are a lot of men who also want to have their way with her, but she's married. Then one day, her husband got the flu, so he was sick for a few weeks. During this time, she, being so convinced of how beautiful she was, began to look for attention elsewhere. And others began to tell her, you know what? That man you're with, he's robbing you, he's holding you down, he doesn't give you enough attention. They began to lie, saying all these ridiculous things, but because she was so attached to attention, her ego was, I would say, her ego was fat, and she blew up. She became proud. So eventually, she began to cheat around, and she told her husband, while her husband was on that bed, I want a divorce. So the husband had the flu, fighting for his life, and she said, I want a divorce. Eventually, the husband said, when the husband recovered, the husband realized, you know what, this is not worth it. Here's your divorce. She was happy she had a divorce. And she began multiple affairs here and there, and none of those other men stayed with her. But here's the thing. When she divorced that man, she was the one who wanted to leave, and she was the one that cheated, so she had to hand in all the jewelry and all the privileges. So she thought, I still have some money left, but she realized later on she had nothing. And now she had to pretend as if she had something, but it didn't work well. Eventually, all the men she got involved with realized this is a woman who cheated on the husband, that did his best for her, and she took advantage of him, and now she wants to pretend like she's the victim. So eventually, everyone figured it out, and they left her. Some of her children even turned on and saying, "We don't want anything to do with you anymore because you're not reliable. You're taking advantage of us to by playing the victim and all of that." So she ended up homeless, poor, depending on aid from strangers. Now, when I'm saying 20 years afterwards, she realized, whoa, 20 years ago, I was wearing expensive jewelry, expensive clothes, I was fancy, I was modest. Now she wants to go back to how things were. Now the children are grown, she wants to go back, but it ain't going to work because her husband has moved on a long time ago, and there's no place for her anymore. So now she passes away, and some of her children who don't want to face what happened to them, to their family, they pretend as if the dad was the one that caused it, because the dad, they have to blame it on the dad somehow, but everyone who listens to the story will think, "But I thought your mom left your dad to be better off. How come he was out of the picture, things are getting worse with her? What did she do after separating from him?" So everyone will see through it. But now, the children develop toxic denial, so they become narcissistic because they want to process it. And this will lead to other conflicts. Now, that was just a parable. Remember, I'm talking about national trauma here. I want to take a look at the example of the country today called Colombia. It was known as the New Kingdom, Kingdom of New Granada under Spanish rule, or later became the Viceroyalty of New Granada, which was combined together with Venezuela and Ecuador. Ecuador became called the Kingdom of Quito, and Panama, which was a Spanish province. It was a prosperous, wealthy place, prestigious, and many in the world wanted to trade with that place. They were popular. It was a booming economy. Spain got into trouble with the French who wanted to invade it, so there was trouble over there. Meanwhile, there were rebels in Colombia that revolted, so for about 2 years there was kind of a mess over there, but Spain restored order in 1813. And in 1814, Ferdinand the Seventh was restored to the throne. So things got back in order. But under Simon Bolivar, they kept on fighting for independence. So Spain granted them in 1819. In October, they were their own nation. But then they decided we want Venezuela also, and we want Quito. So they formed the Republic of Colombia, which failed. They couldn't even agree on a constitution, couldn't even agree on a flag. They couldn't even agree on the currency they were using. They kept on using Spanish currency even after independence. Till they got their own currency based on Spanish currency. So, what were they doing? They had no navy, they had no international relations, they had no stable monetary system, they had nothing. So the Republic of Colombia failed and fell apart in the countries we today know as Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia. Now Colombia changed to another country called the Republic of New Granada. They adopted the name they had during Spanish rule, New Granada, but that were the Republic of New Granada. Later, it became there was civil unrest due to all the poverty and the social problems were increasing, including people that didn't want to let go of slavery. They changed the name to the Grenadine Confederation. Fancy name. It didn't work well. Then it became the United States of Colombia, because locals wanted to have more autonomy because they didn't trust the central government. So you had states. Even that didn't work. There were civil war still. So it turned into the Republic of Colombia. And when it became the Republic of Colombia, this time there were conflicts between the conservatives and the liberals. And the South was impoverished. Like the South was taken advantage of, and the North became wealthy. And this led to in the 20th century to the formation of the FARC, which led to a decades-long civil war that has formally ended, but the problems are still persisting today. So when you look at it from 1819 till today 2020, which is 201 years, there hasn't been any stability in what we call Colombia at all. The Republic of Colombia, which fell apart, decreased in size, Republic of New Granada, Grenadine Confederacy, United States of Colombia, then again the Republic of Colombia. 5 countries were established that succeeded the Spanish Viceroyalty of New Granada, and none of them succeeded. Why? Because when you look at the context, the Viceroyalty of New Granada was relevant, though to the Spanish economy that was on multiple continents. Trade from Asia going to South America. Commerce. Goods from Asia to the Philippines, from China and all of those places coming to South America. South America, transport further into the Caribbean to Europe and to Africa, and also so from the United States there was trade going on. So, as a part of the Spanish Empire, they were prosperous because they had a purpose, and they had the same currency as the people living in what they call Alaska, which was also Spanish territory, the people lived in Cuba, the people lived in Buenos Aires, the people lived in the Philippines. So they were part of a global economy that was working. So in that context, that country functioned well. Apart from that, they were a territory located in a mountainous area with 2 shores, one in the Caribbean, one in the Pacific. There were roads, the Spanish built highways over there, but the highways were connecting to other vice-regal and royal capitals. So, after independence, the cash flow stopped. How are they going to pay for the maintenance of the roads? How are they going to expand the cities? And yet, criollos, those are white Spanish, were born in the Americas. You had the mestizos, those are mixed people. You had the blacks, and you had the natives that were still around, the Indians. So you have a multi-ethnic area with nothing that unifies them to the rest of the world. And now they need a model of what a Colombian or a Grenadinian is. And in this case, it were the criollos, the white folks, the tiny minority, where the Spanish families were left behind. They took the charge, and they modeled everything after them. So of course, other groups are going to revolt. So you look at the ethnic composition of the country. You look at the location of the cities. You look at the infrastructure. You look at the whole bigger picture. You would realize, without being part of a greater empire, this place would not be able to function. Even when they decided to annex Colombia and Quito, today's Ecuador, to make it bigger and more sustainable, it didn't work. Because people that lived all the way in Venezuela, their economy was more focused on exports to Europe than those that lived all the way in the West, which were more focused on trade with Mexico and the United States. So that's why Colombia fell apart in those 3 countries that we have today. So when you go to all of this, you would realize that the people that lived over there, which were over 2 million people, after 1819, their quality of life went backwards. They lost their international relevance. So the poverty and all the civil wars that came afterwards were the result of this independence declaration forced by Simon Bolivar. In Colombia, Bolivar is not seen as a hero at all, because in Colombia they're a bit more realistic about their history. While in Venezuela, they idolize Bolivar as if he's some god figure, as if he's some father figure. But look at Venezuela today. Now what I mean is that what has happened to face the road of New Granada was traumatic. Your own leaders locally lied to you, betrayed you, took advantage of you, which led to generations of poverty and social unrest and urban violence, which still lasts till this day. For such a population to become better, they must face what happened to their ancestors. They must face the effect it had on them. They must face how it affected them as a people and as individuals. And once they process all of this, now they can move forward. But if they keep holding on to a fake historical narrative as if their ancestors fought for their liberation from Spanish tyranny, if they hold on to those myths just to feel bad about themselves, they're not processing anything, and there can't be any healing collectively. Now, this is just Colombia. The whole of Latin America is afflicted by collective traumas that originate in the early 19th century. But many scholars are too hesitant to admit this. Why? Because that superficial nationalism that has been developed in Latin America since the 1950s is what most people there are holding on to. But anyone who looks at it would think, hold on a minute, why are you guys celebrating while most of your countries don't function well? There's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of urban violence, and there are many drug cartels roaming around. And when you go into your history, it has always been such an unstable mess. When was it stable in history? Oh, before 1825, most of you were still stable. But what was it before 1825? Oh, you were part of the Spanish Empire, which was the empire that governed the world. Before Britain, the British Empire emerged, the Spanish Empire governed the world's affairs. The Spanish Empire was a beloved empire. It was not beloved in the sense that people were willing to trade with it, people honored it, people respected it, and it was a global economy that connected all the continents. And the Spanish currency was the dominant currency. Worldwide, everyone counted their international expenses in Spanish real, or Spanish dollar, real de ocho, called in Spanish. So everyone who looks at it will think, what? So you guys today have this mess of republics that don't function well, with civil unrest, with oppression of minorities, with drug cartels here and there. I go through your history for the past 200 years. It has been a mess, but when it was stable, your own ancestors destroyed the stability they had. Then people are going to think, what happened? Who scammed you to your ancestors so that they forfeited their international heritage and their stability and the future of their children like this? Then the descendants need to face that. But what happens after people don't want to face it? They want to hold on to the superficial relief. Now, this is not just about Latin America. All nations have national trauma. It's just that some nations are more open about it, for example, Germany, than others. So, wherever you're from, whether you're from Germany or Japan or somewhere in Latin America or from the United States, wherever you are, realize that national traumas have affected you as they affected everyone. Face those national traumas, observe them, so you are delivered from them. It's only when believers are freed from national traumas that we are able to contribute to the healing and restoration of the nations. Because the nations cannot restore nor heal if people persist in denial. It's not going to work. I'm not saying we should get back to the Spanish Empire. That's not going to work because the situation there is different. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it needs to be processed, and people need to people in Latin America, for example, in all those countries realize that we have a lot in common. Yes, we have a variation in cultures that emerge, but we all have one basis. We're Spanish-speaking people. We only exist because our countries were formed by the Spanish era. So they should face it, and they should realize what happened in the 19th century, how they declined, and they should be willing to work for the better and to let go of superficial differences. Now I know Many will likely not want to cooperate because they hold on to darkness. I know that, but that is what should happen. National trauma leads to national narcissism, or superficial patriotism or superficial nationalism, in which people just want to focus on the perceived greatness of their country, even if it's in their face that greatness does not exist. So, wherever you're from, face the context you grew up in, and also face the generational conflicts if interested onto you. You don't have to receive those generational conflicts, nor do you have to continue in them. Keep on agreeing with Christ. Be at peace.